Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you are from and what time you are watching. That way YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let us begin. I rented the house for the quiet, for the way the dunes erased the rest of the world after dark. The silence sat on my chest like wet sand, heavy enough that every breath felt deliberate, counted. The kind of quiet that does not soothe, it observes. I told myself that was the point, that if I stayed still long enough, the world would forget I was there. My name is Lena Solis, and patience has always frightened me more than panic. Panic exhausts itself. Patience waits until you are tired enough to make a mistake. On November 22nd, 8:14 a.m., the coastal storm began to gather over the Outer Banks without warning or ceremony. Wind flattened the marsh grass as if a hand had been dragged across it. The air tasted metallic, sharp at the back of my tongue, like I would touched something charged. The house stood alone at the end of a sand road that dissolved into beach, lifted on wooden pilings that groaned softly as the tide rose, testing their resolve. Inside, everything smelled recently cleaned. Bleach, lemon oil, something sterile trying too hard to erase what had been there before. I walked the room slowly, touching surfaces without realizing I was checking them. Counters, window latches, door frames. The locks turned smoothly, almost lovingly. I did not like that. The first night, the headlights appeared across the sound just after I turned off the living room lamp. They did not move. They did not sway or drift the way boats do. They were fixed, two white points aimed directly at the house, bright enough to bleach the siding and turn the windows into mirrors. I stood in the dark, my reflection hovering in the glass, watching myself be watched. I raised my phone. The moment my weight shifted, the lights went out, not dimmed, not fading, gone. As if someone had been waiting for that exact movement. I laughed once, sharp and brittle, and told myself fishermen did strange things at night. I slept poorly, dreamed shallow and unfinished, waking with the sense that something had paused and was waiting for me to catch up. The next night, the headlights returned, closer. The beams washed over the house, filling rooms I had not turned lights on in, crawling along walls, exposing corners I had not noticed before. I pulled the curtains, then stood there anyway, acutely aware of how my body must look from the outside, fragmented, then whole, then gone again. The rental agent, Marcy, did not sound surprised when I called. "Probably fishermen," she said easily. "They idle their trucks out there all the time." "They are pointing at the house," he said. A pause. Small, controlled. "There is nothing else out there, sweetheart." The storm arrived after dark, loud and violent enough to make thinking difficult. Rain slammed sideways into the siding. Wind screamed through the gaps beneath the eaves. The power flickered once, then held. I made soup and forgot to eat it, listening to the house respond to the weather, the way bodies respond to pain, tightening, complaining, enduring. Sometime after midnight, I heard footsteps. They did not rush. They did not sneak. They circled the house slowly, methodically, boots brushing wood just enough to be heard. Like someone inspecting a car they already intended to take. The front doorknob turned gently, once, released. The back door followed. Windows rattled under careful pressure, hands learning where the frames flexed. I crouched halfway up the stairs, spine pressed to the wall, breath trapped in my chest so tightly it burned. Then the voice came, low, calm, almost conversational. 1, a pause. 2, the front doorknob turned again, slow enough that I could picture the hand on it. 3, my heart pounded so hard I felt it in my throat. 4, the kitchen window shifted slightly in its frame. He was not counting numbers. He was counting seconds, timing how long it took me to react, measuring how still I could be, training. By morning, the storm had scrubbed the beach clean. The truck was gone. The house smelled wrong. Both doorknobs gleamed wetly, coated in something thick and uneven. When I touched it, the stench hit me, rancid, unmistakable. Rendered animal fat. Old, sour. My stomach lurched. I wiped my hands on my jeans before realizing what I was doing, then scrubbed them in the sink until my skin burned. Inside the lock, something else caught my eye. The screws sat slightly misaligned, the metal scored and reset. Whoever had been there had not forced entry. They had a key. They were choosing not to use it. Low on the door jamb, barely visible unless you knew to look, sat a small white chalk mark. Clean, intentional. At the sheriff's office, the deputy did not dismiss it. He leaned closer to the photo on my phone, his mouth tightening. "We saw this on the Miller place last month," he said quietly. "What does that mean?" I asked. He hesitated. Then, "Same grease. Same mark." He swallowed. "They never found the daughter." I packed without daylight. At home, I tried to reclaim control through hardware and repetition. New locks, reinforced doors, a practice deadbolt I bought just to dismantle and rebuild on my kitchen table at night, teaching my hands what safety felt like again. One evening, I came home late. The kitchen light was on. On the table, laid out with careful precision, was my practice lock, fully dismantled, every piece cleaned, aligned more neatly than I would ever manage. Beside it sat a chalk mark, the same size, the same angle. That night, headlights appeared on my street. They did not move. I stood at the window, watching them wait. I did not panic. I had new locks now. I had a gun in the nightstand. I felt something cold and victorious settle into my chest. I turned away from the window. That is when I heard the counting. 41. It was not outside. 42. It was close. Inside. 43. The sound came from the closet behind me. I froze. 44. The voice was calm, patient. I looked at the closet door. The knob gleamed wetly, slick with rancid fat. Just above the latch, a small chalk mark waited. Precise. Final. I had not locked him out. I had locked myself in with him. And he had simply been waiting for me to stop moving so he could finish his count. I did not open the door, because the countryside teaches you to listen first. Silence out here is never empty. It has texture. It presses against your ears and makes every small sound. Wood settling, a distant owl, the tick of the wall clock, feel intentional. That night, the quiet wrapped the house so tightly, I could hear my own breathing ricochet off it, soft and embarrassed, like it did not belong. My name is Maggie Pierce, and my fear has always been how easily kindness can be rehearsed. At 2:06 a.m. on March 14th, a thin frost silvered the yard and the Blue Ridge, the grass brittle as spun sugar under the moon. The house sat in that rural stillness that amplifies everything, every sigh of wind through the trees, every creak of timber, as if the land itself were listening. I had fallen asleep on the couch with the lamp on, a paperback splayed open on my chest, Scout curled at my feet. I woke to the sound that does not belong to dreams. A knock, not loud, not desperate. 3 taps, evenly spaced, confident, the kind of knock that assumes it will be answered. Scout's head lifted before mine did. His ears went forward. A low sound gathered in his chest, not quite a growl yet, more like a warning being warmed up. I lay still and listened. Another set of taps. The porch boards creaked under a shift of weight. Whoever it was knew how to stand without shuffling, how to wait without fidgeting. That was the first wrong thing, though I would not name it until later. I slid off the couch and moved through the dark without turning on lights, the way you learn to do when your windows face nothing but trees. At the front door, I leaned close and peered through the narrow glass pane. A man stood on my porch with his hands visible, palms open, shoulders relaxed. He wore a jacket too light for the hour, breath fogging faintly. He smiled when he saw my shadow, the smile settling into place like a practiced expression. "Sorry to bother you," he said, voice pitched just above a whisper, polite as a church foyer. "My truck died down the road. Any chance I could use your phone?" Behind me, Scout growled low, the sound crawling along the floorboards and into my cabs. The man glanced past me, eyes flicking to the dark inside the house. "I have got my brother waiting," he added quickly, as if reading hesitation like a script cue. "Just need to let him know where I am. Will not take a second." He gave me a number. He asked me to be quick. Kindness can be rehearsed. I knew that. I had moved here because I wanted space, because city politeness had begun to feel like a trapdoor. Still, there is a reflex you have to override to say no to someone who stands with their hands visible and their voice gentle. "I will call for you," I said through the door. "You can wait there." His smile tightened. "Sure, that is fine." I did not open the door. I went to the kitchen and dialed the number on mute, my back to the counter, eyes on the dark window over the sink. Outside, the porch light buzzed insects into a halo, moths throwing themselves against the glass with soft, desperate taps. The phone rang once, twice. From the side yard came a soft electronic trill, the same ringtone, muffled, close, wrong. My stomach dropped, slow and heavy, like an elevator losing power. Scout's growl deepened, turned sharp. I stood frozen, phone buzzing in my hand, the sound in the yard threading through the silence with surgical precision. It was close enough that I could tell it was coming from behind a house, near the kitchen window. I entered the call and did not move. A shadow slid along the back of the house, careful feet testing the gravel, avoiding the loose stones. I could hear breathing now, not the man's on the porch, but another, faster, excited. The countryside teaches you to listen first. It also teaches predators to wait. I went back to the door and spoke without opening it. "I'm calling 911, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. The man's voice changed shape immediately, polite edges falling away like a dropped mask. That is not necessary," he said too fast. "We do not want any trouble. We." The word landed hard. The ringing stopped outside my kitchen window. Fingers curled under the sash and lifted. I grabbed the knife from the block, hands steady the way fear sometimes makes them, when there is no time left for doubt. The window gave with a soft sigh, glass whispering as it rose. A face filled the dark, eyes bright, mouth stretched into a grin that assumed solitude. I slashed once, hard, felt fabric give, heard pain turn sharp and animal. They ran, one off the porch, boots tearing at the frost, the other bleeding into the trees, branches snapping as he went. Scout exploded into barking, a furious, righteous sound that chased them into the woods. I locked myself in the bathroom and called it in for real, my name coming out flat and practiced, like I'd rehearsed it. Sirens took forever. Dawn took longer. That was the story everyone heard. That was the version that fit. The rest of it started later, when the quiet came back. The days after were filled with procedures and voices that used the word incident, like it made everything smaller. Deputies walked the perimeter with flashlights and found footprints where frost had been disturbed, a smear of blood that vanished at the tree line. They nodded and took notes, and told me I would done everything right. "You are lucky," one of them said, not looking at me. "Could have been worse." Luck is a word people use, and they do not want to talk about patterns. My neighbor, Mr. Abernathy, came by with a thermos of coffee and a sympathy that felt worn smooth from use. He stood in my kitchen and listened, nodding in the right places, his eyes drifting to the window as if measuring it. "Probably kids," he said. "They get bored. Mountains echo. Sounds travel funny out here. Kids do not knock like that. Kids do not split into two." I went back to work remotely and told myself routine would sand the edges down. The house smelled faintly of bleach where I was scrubbed the window frame. The knife sat clean and dry in the block. Scout followed me from room to room, his presence a moving wall. At night I kept the lamps on. I slept in short, shallow stretches, waking at every sound. The ringtone came back first, soft and distant, drifting in from the trees when the wind shifted. I told myself it was memory, my brain replaying what it did not understand yet. When my phone buzzed on the table during the day, I flinched hard enough to spill coffee. I started to notice small things. The gate at the end of the drive, which I always kept latched, hanging open in the mornings. Tire tracks that did not match mine pressed into the dirt near the mailbox. Once, a cigarette butt on the gravel shoulder, crushed flat and deliberate, though I do not smoke and neither does Mr. Abernathy. I called the sheriff's office again and was told to log it. "Probably coincidence," the voice said. "Keep your doors locked. Kindness can be rehearsed, so can dismissal." I set up motion lights along the side yard and a cheap trail camera facing the trees. I told myself this was rational, that preparation was not paranoia. Scout watched me work with his head tilted, tail low, when the camera chirped its activation tone for the first time. That same electronic trill. My hands shook so badly, I had to sit down. The first night it captured nothing but moths and wind-blurred branches. The second night, a figure stood just beyond the edge of the infrared, patient, only a shoulder visible, then gone. The timestamp glowed red and precise. I did not show anyone. I started to hear footsteps that stopped when I listened too hard. The house settled, and I cataloged each sound, assigning it a cause, a story. The countryside remembers who hesitates. It keeps score. On the fourth night, I woke to Scout's hackles raised and the unmistakable pressure of being watched. I lay still, counting breaths. Outside, something scraped lightly against the siding. A testing sound, almost affectionate. The motion lights did not come on. In the morning, the trail camera was gone. I walked the property with the knife in my pocket, my senses tuned so tight, the world felt sharpened. At the tree line, found it propped carefully against a trunk, lens wiped clean, battery removed. Beneath it, a folded scrap of paper weighed down with a stone. You did good. Next time. Answer. I burned the note in the sink and watched the ash curl. I did not call anyone. I told myself that acknowledging it would make it real in a way I was not ready for. That night I sat at the kitchen table with the lights off, listening. The ringtone came closer, moving around the house like a surveyor, measuring. I spoke out loud into the dark, my voice calm and practiced. I know you are there. Silence answered, thick and satisfied. I thought about leaving, packing a bag, driving until the mountains softened into something else. But there was a stubbornness in me that I had not known was there, a refusal to let the land decide for me. I bolted the window, they would opened, and added a deadbolt to the door. I slept with the knife under my pillow and Scout pressed against my back, solid and warm. The next knock came at dusk, early enough to be polite. I stood on the other side of the door and did not move. The knock came again, softer this time, almost apologetic. Maggie, a voice called, gentle as memory. It is Mr. Abernethy. Thought I would check in. Scout's growl rolled low and sustained. I did not open the door. Through the glass I saw a silhouette shift. A hand lifted, fingers splayed in a familiar visible gesture. Kindness, rehearsed. Everything all right? The voice asked. A beat. Left your gate open? I backed away and picked up my phone. As I did, the ringtone sounded from the side yard, close enough that I could feel it in my teeth. The knock stopped. I do not answer the door anymore, even in daylight. Sometimes I think I hear two sets of footsteps moving in opposite directions, keeping time. Sometimes the ringtone plays from inside the house, from a room I just left. When I check my phone, it is off. The countryside does not forget. It waits. I moved to the countryside to reset my life, not to have it corrected. The sentence formed fully intact before my eyes opened, as if my mind had rehearsed it overnight and was now presenting it for approval. I lay still, listening. The house was quiet in a way that felt deliberate, the kind of quiet that does not happen naturally, but is achieved, maintained. No birds, no wind through the eaves. Even the old refrigerator, which should have groaned and clicked, remained silent. When I finally sat up, my body felt wrong, heavy, but not tired, calm, but not rested. My limbs obeyed me with a delay, as though I were issuing commands to the water. The fog outside pressed flat against the bedroom window, turning the glass into a pale, featureless square. Hollow Creek hid itself most mornings like this, retreating behind mist until it decided you were ready to see it. I swung my legs out of bed and caught my reflection in the darkened window. Something about my face was aligned. That was the word that surfaced. Clinical and unwelcome. Aligned, as if the parts of me had been adjusted overnight to better fit some unseen standard. I shook my head and stood, bare feet sinking into the cold floorboards. Halfway to the bathroom, a faint metallic smell reached me, clean, sharp, out of place. I flipped on the light. My hair stopped me first. The uneven ends I would been meaning to trim for months were gone, not shortened crudely or hacked away, but shaped, even, professional. The line at my shoulders was precise enough to make my chest tighten. I stepped closer to the mirror, heart beginning to thud, and that was when I saw the bandage. A small circular adhesive sat neatly at the crook of my left arm. The skin beneath it was faintly bruised, tender when I touched it, The soreness unmistakable. A blood draw. My breath came faster. I peeled the bandage back with shaking fingers. The puncture mark beneath was clean, centered, the work of someone practiced. On the counter beside the sink, a folded note, placed squarely, as if aligned to the edge. Iron levels low. Spinach added to grocery list. Supplement adjusted. I sat down hard on the edge of the tub, nausea rolling through me in a slow, measured wave. My mind reached backward, trying to reconstruct the night. I remembered making tea, chamomile, I thought. The steam fogging my glasses. The taste had been different, bitter, medicinal. I remembered sitting on the couch, intending to read. Then nothing, no dreams, no memory of lying down, just absence. By the time I made it to the kitchen, the coffee pot was warm, half empty. The smell filled the house, rich and grounding, and for one sickening moment I felt relief before the fear slammed back in harder. I had not made coffee. My shoes were lined up by the door, toes pointing outward, perfectly spaced. I was not a neat person. I had never been a neat person. Another note waited beside the mug. Volume reduced after 10 o'clock a.m. p.m. Improved sleep latency observed. I backed away from the counter, scanning the room. The locks were still thrown, the windows intact. No sign of forced entry, no disturbance, except the kind you could not photograph. Outside, footsteps approached on the gravel. I opened the door to find Mrs. Gable standing at the edge of the porch, clipboard tucked under her arm. She did not smile. Her eyes moved over me with brisk efficiency. Face, posture, hands, then flicked briefly to my pupils. She checked her watch. "You are waking later," she said. "That indicates resistance." My throat felt tight. "You cut my hair." "Yes." "You took my blood." "Yes." She marked something on the clipboard, the pen scratching softly. "Adaptation takes approximately 72 hours. You are behind schedule, Elena." The way she said my name, flat, precise, made my skin prickle. "You drugged me," I said. "Sedation improves compliance," she replied evenly. "Compliance improves outcomes." Gone was the warmth I would first mistaken for kindness. Standing there, cardigan buttoned to the throat, clipboard held like an extension of her arm, she looked less like a neighbor and more like a clinical matron overseeing the ward. "This is not help," I said. Her gaze dropped to my hands. "Your tremor has reduced by 40% since intake." I had not realized my hands were shaking until she said it. Inside the house, the logbook waited on the kitchen table, exactly where I had left it days earlier. I had not been able to throw it away. Some part of me needed to understand. This time I read it carefully. Meals, sleep cycles, bathroom habits, mood indicators, under intervention. New entries had been added in the same neat hand. Subject resisting. Dosage increased to 50 milligrams in evening tea. REM suppression effective. No nocturnal disturbance observed. My chest tightened painfully. The grogginess, the missing time, the silence at night. It all aligned with terrifying clarity. I had not been sleeping deeply because of the country air. I had been sedated since the day I arrived. When I confronted Mrs. Gable that afternoon, she did not deny anything. She did not raise her voice or attempt comfort. She simply led me into her basement. The stairs descended into a room that hummed softly, filled wall to wall with monitors arranged in precise rows. Each screen showed a different house, different rooms, kitchens, bedrooms. Hollow creak, observed. "This is the control room," she said calmly. "Optimization requires oversight." On one monitor, I saw myself asleep the night before, mouth slightly open, chest rising and falling in slow, regulated rhythm. A figure, her, entered the frame, adjusted the blanket, checked my pulse. "Why are you fighting the cure, dear?" she asked. "Your affect is stable. Your skin is clearer. You arrived to dysregulated." "I did not ask for this," I said. "No one does," she replied. "That is why it works. I ran at dawn, not because they chased me, but because I found the dosage chart hidden behind the oats in my pantry. The fields tore at my legs as I ran, corn leaves slicing my skin, bells ringing from houses I could not see, their rhythm steady and patient. The highway emerged through the fog like a vein of certainty, and I crossed it without looking back. I had been back in the city for 3 weeks. My apartment feels too loud, too loose. Dishes pile in the sink because no one reminds me to wash them. I forget to eat until my hands shake violently enough to notice. Sleep comes in fragments, thin, shallow intervals that leave me more exhausted than rest ever did. My skin has gone gray again. The tremors are back. Worse, some days. Yesterday, I stood in my kitchen for 20 minutes, staring at the empty coffee pot, waiting for it to turn on, waiting for someone to tell me I was thirsty. I catch myself cataloging my own behaviors now, the way they did. Baseline versus deviation, correction versus failure. The terrifying part is not that they controlled me. The terrifying part is that they corrected me so completely that I no longer trust my own chaos. I kept the spare key. Every night, before I lie down, I take it out and turn it over in my fingers, imagining the quiet order of Hollow Creek, the certainty, the care. And sometimes, when sleep refuses to come and my thoughts spiral without structure, I find myself wondering if adaptation would be easier the second time around. Because for the first time in my life, I was stable, and I do not know how to be anything without permission anymore. I bought the place because it was cheap and empty, or so the bank paperwork promised, and from the moment I signed my name, I felt as if something had leaned closer to read it with me. Ownership, I would learn, does not mean possession. It means visibility. I had told myself the move was practical, a reset. A foreclosure in the Ozarks, northern Arkansas. Acres of quiet land for less than my apartment back home had cost in a year. The realtor's voice on the phone had been cheerful but detached, the way people sound when they are repeating something they have already said too many times. It has been vacant for a while, she would assured me. Bank-owned, clean title. You will be alone out there. Alone sounded like relief. On September 11th at 5:46 a.m., gray dawn seeped into the mountains as I drove the last miles of gravel road, pine sap sharp in the air, rot underneath it like something sweet gone wrong. Fog clung low to the land, not thick enough to blind me, just enough to soften the edges. The farmhouse appeared slowly, as if it had been standing there waiting for my eyes to adjust. It was not dramatic. That was part of the problem. A sagging white structure with porch that leaned slightly to the left. A barn set back from the house, like a thought someone had not finished. Tall grass breathed when the wind passed through it, bowing and lifting in a way that felt less like weather and more like a response. I parked, cut the engine, and sat there longer than necessary, listening to the tick of cooling metal. I remember thinking, it is quiet, not peaceful, not calm. Quiet in a way that felt rehearsed, like a room holding its breath because it knew it was being watched. The key turned easily. The door opened without complaint. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old wood, and something faintly metallic. The floors creaked where you would expect them to, not randomly, as if the house followed its own internal logic. Sunlight slipped through the windows in pale strips, catching motes that drifted lazily, unconcerned. I walked from room to room, narrating under my breath like a person who needed to hear a human voice to make the space real. Kitchens smaller than the pictures. I said, that is fine. That is okay. The first night, I slept badly but deeply, the way you do after physical exhaustion. The mattress was old but firm. The house settled around me with soft, periodic sounds, wood contracting, something moving in the walls that I told myself was mice. I dreamed of standing in a field while someone counted behind me, their voice calm, patient, never reaching zero. In the morning, sunlight woke me, not an alarm, not a noise. I went into the kitchen barefoot, still half asleep, already planning coffee in my head, and stopped cold. There was a loaf of bread on the counter, not packaged, not store-bought. A rough round loaf, split naturally at the top, steam still ghosting faintly into the air. Crumbs lay neatly beneath it, deliberate, as if someone had been careful not to make a mess. I stared at it for a long time before touching it. The crust was warm. My first thought was mundane and absurd. I do not remember buying bread. The second thought followed quickly, sharper. There is nowhere nearby to buy bread like this. I laughed then, actually laughed. The sound echoed strangely in the kitchen, louder than it should have been. Long drive, I told myself. Stress, new place. I tore off a piece, tasted it, dense, slightly sweet, homemade. I ate it standing there, refusing to let the unease settle, refusing to give it shape. It was later, in the barn, that the shape began to form. The barn door groaned when I slid it open, the smell inside heavier. Hay, old manure, oil, sunlight speared through gaps in the boards, stripping the dirt floor. I walked slowly, careful where I stepped, scanning for snakes. Toward the back, behind stacked feed sacks stiff with age, I saw something out of place. A bedroll. Canvas, faded green, rolled loosely, not packed away. The earth beneath it was compressed, a shallow dent, like someone had just stood up. Close by sat a dented metal mug, still damp inside. My pulse picked up. I crouched, pressed my fingers to the dirt, cool, recently disturbed. Footprints led away from the bedroll, clear impressions in the dust. They moved toward the barn door, then curved, looping back toward the house. I straightened slowly, heart pounding, scanning the open doorway, the fields beyond. Nothing moved except the grass. I locked the doors that night, dragged a chair into my bedroom, wedged it against the wall near the door, an improvised solution that felt ridiculous and necessary at the same time. I checked the locks twice, 3 times. The sound of metal sliding home was comforting. Sleep did not come easily. When it did, it ended abruptly. 2:18 a.m. 8:1. I woke with the certainty of being looked at. No sound had woken me. No dream lingered. Just the immediate, electric awareness that my privacy had been breached in the most fundamental way. My eyes opened, heart racing, breath shallow. The chair was no longer against the wall. It stood at the foot of my bed, turned around, positioned squarely toward me. The floorboards had not creaked. The door was still locked. The handle had not moved. I sat there frozen, blankets clenched in my fists, staring at that empty seat, as if someone might fade into view if I watched long enough. The darkness felt structured, intentional. I turned on the lamp with a shaking hand. Nothing else was disturbed. In the morning, I told myself the story I needed to survive. Sleepwalking, stress, new environment. I moved the chair back, laughed too loudly at my own nerves, and went about unpacking. But over the next days, my things shifted, subtly, politely. Soap was damp when I had not showered. The television volume lowered while I slept. A window unlatched, then latched again. I started leaving notes for myself, locked the door, turned off the stove, and finding them rearranged, aligned more neatly than I ever bothered to do. I slept with the lights on, counted seconds, listened for breathing that was not mine. One afternoon, I drove into town, needing human noise like oxygen. The hardware store was small, dusty, staffed by a man with a kind face and a habit of humming while he rang things up. He asked casually how I was liking the old foreclosure. "Quiet," I said. He smiled. "That place has a way of settling in around people." Something in his tone made me look up. "You mean the land?" He hesitated. "Just a fraction." "Sure, the land." At the diner, I mentioned the bread to a waitress while she refilled my coffee. She paused, pot hovering. "You did not make it?" "No." She frowned, then smoothed her expression. "Probably a neighbor being welcoming. Neighbors that bake and do not knock." She shrugged. "Folks out here do not always announce themselves." Back at the house, the pantry told a different story. A plate sat on the counter, scraped clean, faintly smelling of my dinner from the night before. The fork rested beside it, washed and dried. I stood there, hands trembling, realization settling heavy in my chest. The barn no longer felt like the problem. It felt like the excuse. I started locking my bedroom door as well as the front door. The house seemed to accept this, responding not with escalation but with patience, as if it had time. One night, muddy footprints appeared beside my bed, toes pointed inward, as if someone had stood there, undecided. I left before sunrise, threw clothes into my car, did not pack properly, did not look back, drove straight to town, to the bank, to anyone who would listen. I sold the property at a loss, so steep the teller winced when she slid the papers across the desk. "You do not want to wait for a better offer?" she asked gently. "No," I said. "I do not want to be known there." Weeks later, in my apartment, I woke to silence, too precise to be accidental. My bedroom chair had been turned toward me. And in that moment, I understood the truth I had been circling since the beginning. Some places do not let you live alone. They do not follow you because they are attached to you. They follow you because once you have been seen, truly seen, you never belong entirely to yourself again. Ownership is just permission to be watched more closely. And somewhere, something is still sitting very patiently, waiting for me to notice. I came to the countryside to disappear for a season, not to be found by something that knew my name before I spoke it. The quiet out there was not peaceful. It was mechanical. Quiet enough to hear the house pipes groaning, the tick inside the walls, like an old watch buried alive. I learned that on the first night, standing in the kitchen with my hands wrapped around a mug that never quite steamed the way it should have. My name is Lena Hart, and I had told myself that if I put enough miles between me and Redwood County Clinic, my mistakes would stop replaying in my head. I needed space where nothing expected anything from me. No charts, no alarms, no eyes. I rented the farmhouse on Willow Bend Road because it was cheap, remote, and came with the promise of boredom. Boredom felt like medicine. On October 3rd, 6:41 a.m. p.m., rain turned the fields into a gray slurry. The sky hung low and dull, like wet cardboard. The air smelled of rust and old hay, sharp enough to sit on the tongue. The house sat pat the cattle gate, lone in a way that made my shoulders tense before I even shut off the engine. The windows were dark, not abandoned, just unlit, as if waiting for someone to decide whether they mattered. Inside, the place was clean, but wrong in small ways. Furniture, slightly too far from the walls. A clock already running. Floorboards sighed when I stepped, not loudly, just enough to let me know they were paying attention. I unpacked slowly, forcing routine onto the space. Books on one shelf, clothes folded, groceries lined up by expiration date. I told myself order would teach the house my habits. That night, the porch light shut off at 9:12 a.m. I know the time because I was watching it from the window, counting raindrops sliding down the glass. The light did not flicker. It did not fade. It just went dark, like someone had reached up and twisted it with care. A shape crossed the yard, heavy, low to the ground. I waited for the sound of boots in mud. Nothing. The yard stayed smooth. Sleep came in thin pieces. I kept waking to the sense that something had shifted while I was not looking, like a room rearranged behind your back. In the morning, my boots were by the door, clean. The dried mud gone from the soles, the laces tucked in neatly, the way I never bothered to do. I stood there longer than I should have, trying to remember washing them. The memory refused to show up. When I called Caleb, the owner, he laughed softly. "Country living," he said. "You will get used to it." When I pressed him, asked if anyone checked the place while I was there, he said no, then asked too specifically, "How would you sleep?" I said fine. I did not like how quickly he accepted that. The days settled into a dull rhythm. I transcribed old case notes I would brought with me, redacting names, listening to the rain hit the tin edge of the roof. The quiet pressed on my ears until they rang. When the wind stopped, something else filled the space. Not words, just breath, like someone standing on the other side of a door, listening back. On the second afternoon, Martha showed up with bread wrapped in wax paper. She did not step off the concrete porch, not once. Her shoes stayed planted like they were nailed there. When a dead leaf skittered across the porch and brushed her toe, she flinched hard, bent down, and brushed it away with her sleeve, fast and frantic, like it burned. "I am your closest neighbor," she said, smiling too tight. Figured I would say hello. I invited her in. She shook her head. "I will not be long." Her eyes kept drifting past me, toward the fields. When the wind kicked up, she tucked her hands into her sleeves, hiding her fingers. Before she left, she pressed a rosary into my palm. Her hand shook. "Do not walk the fields after dark," she said. "And do not give it more than you have to." "Give what?" I asked. She did not answer. She just backed away, careful not to let her heel touch the grass. That night, I found writing carved into the barn post, shallow grooves, fresh wood pale against the older grain, my handwriting, no hesitation in the lines, dates that did not match my calendar. Names, I knew, names that made my stomach tighten. I scraped at the letters until my fingers stung, until splinters lodged under my nails. The grooves stayed. On the fourth morning, I decided to leave. I loaded the car, hands shaking with relief, and drove. The road was straight enough, bordered by fences and half-dead trees. I passed a leaning mailbox we'd noticed on the way in. 10 minutes later, I passed it again. The second time, the red flag was snapped off. I kept driving. The radio cut in and out, voices warping into low hums. When I saw the main road sign, I almost laughed. I turned toward it and ended up back at the cattle gate. The sign was twisted now, bolts loose, pointing the wrong way. Someone had dragged it. I got out of the car and ran my hands along the fence line. Fresh scuffs, boot prints. I drove again. Each time I reached the far end of the property, the engine sputtered and died, like it was choking on something thick. The moment I rolled back downhill, it turned over without complaint. By the time I parked again, my hands were numb. That afternoon, I sat down with coffee at 8 a.m. I know because I set the clock myself. I blinked. The coffee was cold. Not lukewarm, cold enough to taste sour. The surface was filmed with mold, green and delicate. My neck screamed when I tried to move. Every joint felt packed with sand. The clock read 7 a.m. p.m. My legs had gone stiff, pins and needles biting deep. I had been sitting there for 10 hours, sick, staring at the wall. I checked my phone. No messages, no missed calls. Just a gap where the day should have been. After that, I started recording my sleep. Not video, audio. I told myself it was practical. Maybe I snored. Maybe the house made noise. I set the phone on the nightstand and hit record. The first playback was static and breathing. Mine, I thought. Slow, heavy. Then my voice started talking. It sounded like me, but wrong, lower, worn down. I can do this, it said. I will stay. It is easier if I stay. Something answered. Not words. Pressure. A sound like wind pushing through dry stalks. I know, my voice said. I have always known. I dropped the phone and it skidded across the floor, still recording. When Martha came again, I noticed her shoes had new soles. Thick, untouched. She stood rigid on the porch, refusing the coffee I offered. You need to go, she said, eyes darting. Before it finishes the paperwork. What paperwork? She swallowed. It likes caretakers. I drove to town and went straight to the sheriff's office. The deputy listened, nodding, kind in the way people are when they have already decided you were tired. He pulled my rental contract from a folder. You signed on as a long-term caretaker, he said. I laughed. Then I saw the signature. Mine. The date read 1924. The handwriting matched the barn. I ran. I ran through the fields, lungs tearing, the ground sucking in my shoes. Something moved with me, not chasing, just keeping pace. When I reached the fence, I tore through the wire and slid into a drainage culvert, mud filling my mouth. Whatever was above me paced once, twice, then stopped, waiting. I made it back to the city days later. I do not know how. My phone says I arrived before I left. Now, soil shows up under my nails no matter how much I scrub. I cough at night, dry and deep. The doctor ordered an X-ray. He stared at it too long. It is not fluid, he said carefully. There is particulate matter, dust, wheat chaff. Something inside me is learning the shape of the fields. When the wind rises without weather, I hear counting. It has not forgotten me. It is patient. I thought buying land would teach me control, not inheritance. The sentence settled into me. The first morning I stood at the kitchen window and watched the wheat bow under a west wind that had learned the fields better than I had. It was early, too early for certainty, yet the sky was already bleaching towards summer. A thin, chalky blue that made promises it would not keep. We would lock to the gate the night before. I remembered the weight of the chain in my hands, the small, righteous click of the padlock closing, the way I tested it twice because new ownership makes you nervous in places you do not admit. By dawn, the gate stood open. hinges clearing their throat like someone about to speak. I told myself it was settling, old hardware, wind. I told myself a lot of things in those first weeks, because it felt important to be the kind of person who does not startle at shadows. Com Holloway did the same. He always did, shrugging into work boots, pouring coffee too hot, kissing my cheek with a joke about ghosts, because humor makes boundaries feel sturdier than they are. We were starting over on purpose, miles from the last place where neighbors learned your rhythms, before your name. The deed said Finney County, the realtor said clean lines, and I said yes because the horizon looked honest. By the third morning, the gate was open again. The cattle were calm. That was the detail that stuck like a burr. They did not crowd the fence or mill with a low, anxious sound they make when something has gone wrong in the night. They grazed as if the land had exhaled, and they would exhaled with it. When I mentioned it, Sarah, my name, said softly by people who knew me before I learned how to keep score, made a face like she was tasting something odd. If it were a person, she said, they would spook. Right. I laughed because laughing is cheaper than relatching fear. Maybe they liked the breeze. Maybe, Tom said, already turning away. He wanted the day to begin, wanted proof that new ground obeys the same rules. We installed trail cams that afternoon, the plastic smell sharp and chemical in the sun. The fence posts were old, their grain raised and soft, as if they would been handled a lot. I noticed it then, the polish where hands had gone, the way numbers had been carved into one post, shallow and patient. The place had been tended. That word mattered. It was not empty. It had been kept. The first footage was ordinary. Wind worrying grass, a rabbit ghosting across the frame, the moon hanging low like a thumbprint. Then, on the third night, the camera at the gate caught him. Old man Ricketts moved the way men do, when they have nothing left to hurry toward. He wore a jacket too light for the cold, and a hat that had learned the shape of his head. That the ring of keys was heavy enough to make his hip lean when he walked. He unlocked the gate without looking, hand finding the right key by feel, not sight. When the lock opened, he touched the post like you might touch a child's shoulder passing through a doorway. I watched it twice, then again, the way you do when repetition might make something untrue. He did not look at the camera. He did not need to. He walked the paths as if his feet were remembering for him, counting steps under his breath. When he stopped near the barn, I leaned closer to the screen because I wanted to hear what he whispered to nothing. Tom said we should talk to him. Get the keys back, he said, practical as a ledger. He probably forgot. We found Ricketts in town at the feed store, his hands trembling over a sack of pellets. Up close, he smelled like old soap and hay dust. He listened without interrupting, eyes wet but steady, as if this was a conversation he would rehearse. The land did not know it had changed hands yet, he said, voice thin and sincere. He gave Tom the keys with shaking fingers and asked us to keep the place the same. It gets confused, he said, and for a moment I thought he meant himself. I felt sorry for him then. That is the thing I do not forgive myself for. Not the fear, but the mercy that came too early. The barn smelt like oil and rot, and something sweet underneath, like fruit left too long. We were clearing space, laughing about the junk he would left. When I found the shrine, it was not elaborate. It did not need to be. Photos taped to plywood, me hanging laundry, my hair pinned the way I do when I do not plan to be seen. Tom fixing the gate, his mouth set with the concentration he wears like armor. Our truck coming and going, time-stamped and careful. Maps with our routines penciled in, the graphite smudged from use. A child's drawing of a house labeled ours. I burned the papers. We changed every lock. I slept light for weeks. Ricketts never came back. The gate still clicks sometimes in the wind. I tell myself it is metal cooling, hinges remembering old hands. I tell myself the land does not forget who tended it. It just decides who it belongs to next. When I look out across the fields, I wonder who is still keeping watch. The days learned us. That is what Tom said when the novelty wore thin and the work settled into muscle. He liked to name things because naming can give you a handhold. I learned the smell of the mornings, dust and green sap, a dry sweetness that caught at the back of the throat. I learned how the light flattened at noon and sharpened at dusk, how sound traveled farther than you expected, how silence here was not empty but layered. I learned to tell the difference between wind in the wheat and footsteps along the fence, except sometimes I could not. There were small things. A gate latch lifted and set down, not enough to open, just enough to test. A note of movement near the barn at the edge of hearing, the cattle staying calm when they should not have. Once, I found the ladder leaned where I did not leave it, angled just so, like a suggestion. Tom said I was reading into it. He was gentle. "We will add another cam," he said, already solving. The new cameras showed nothing. That was worse. Frames of nothing are a mirror you start to distrust. At night, I lay awake listening to the house settle, the wood speaking its old language, and try to remember whether I would lock the door or only thought I had. Sometimes Tom's breathing felt like a metronome I could lose track of if I was not careful. I started marking things down. Times, sounds, the way the wind changed direction when the gate clicked. The notebook lived in the kitchen drawer with the scissors and tape, ordinary enough to pass. Writing steadied me until it did not. The marks began to look like someone else's hand. I would wake and see an entry I did not remember making. 3:14 a.m. Fence line quiet and feel the floor tilt. "Listen," Tom said one evening, standing with me on the porch. The wheat whispered in waves. Somewhere, metal answered metal. The gate. "It is just wind." "Wind does not unlock things," I said. He did not argue. That was new. We talked about selling. The word sat between us like a bruise. "We cannot let him win," Tom said, then corrected himself. "Not him. This." He gestured to the land like it had opinions. The night I saw him again, it was not on the screen. It was late, and the moon was a thin hook. I was half asleep on the couch when the sound came. Keys, unmistakable, a soft, practiced music. I did not move. Fear made me precise. Through the window, at the edge of the yard, a figure stood where the light fell just enough to make a shape. He did not try the gate. He did not need to. He raised his hand, palm out, like a greeting or a warning. Then he stepped back into the wheat, which parted for him and closed. Tom searched with a flashlight until dawn. We found nothing. The cattle were calm. After that, the land began to change in ways I could not explain without sounding unhinged. Paths smoothed where no one walked. A post straightened itself. The house felt observed, not watched, observed, the way a thing is studied for continuity. I caught myself moving quietly, aligning my routines to the marks on those burned maps. When I noticed, I laughed loud and broke something on purpose, just to hear the noise. We found a key on the kitchen table one morning, not ours, old, worn smooth. Tom held it between finger and thumb like it might speak. "How did this get here?" he asked, and the question sounded like an apology. We drove to town and asked about Ricketts. The woman at the counter frowned. "We moved on," she said. "Been tending other places. He is good with land." She said it like a compliment. That night, I dreamed the gate opened itself. I dreamed hands I could not see counting steps. I dreamed the house learned me the way the fields had, adjusting its creaks to my weight, its size, to my breath. I stopped sleeping. The confrontation came the way these things do, not with shouting, but with inevitability. I was in the barn, sorting what we'd kept, when I heard the whisper again, not words, counting. I stepped around the stacked boards, and there he was, older than before, or maybe I was seeing him clearly now. He did not look surprised. "It is not yours yet," he said, and his voice was kinder than it had any right to be. "It takes time." I said Tom's name because I needed it to be real. I said mine because I needed to remember it. Ricketts smiled, not unkindly. "It knows you," he said. "That helps." When Tom came running, the barn was empty, no footprints. The cattle load, uneasy at last. We put the place up for sale. The listing photos were beautiful. The gate was locked. The night before the first showing, the wind rose and the hinges clicked. I stood at the window and watched the wheat bend. For a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw a hand lift in the distance, palm out, keeping time. I do not know who owns the land now. The papers say one thing, the gate says another. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I feel the count under my breath, the steps I could walk without looking. The inheritance you do not ask for is the hardest to refuse.